The privilege is over, my husband announced, deciding that from now on we'd keep separate budgets. I agreed, already knowing he'd regret it soon. On Sunday, as usual, my in-laws came for lunch. But when my mother-in-law stepped into the kitchen, she screamed so loudly that even the neighbors rushed out of their houses. My name is Mary Ann, and I want to tell you about a Friday night that completely rewrote the script of my life. I had just spent hours preparing a lavish three-course dinner, a tradition for my husband Leonard's parents. The aroma of our carefully chosen meal still lingered in the air when he turned to me, his gaze holding that chilling, calculated calm I'd come to know so well. "Mary Ann," he said, his voice flat, "your comfortable life at my expense is over." Just like that. Those exact words, delivered in the very living room we'd purchased with the inheritance from my beloved Grandma Teresa, still echo in my memory. His tone was as cold and precise as if he were signing a contract, not tearing apart the delicate balance of our marriage. Some humiliations don't strike you like a physical blow. They're more insidious, seeping in like a silent poison, slowly paralyzing you before you even realize what's happening. Have you ever been made to feel utterly invisible in your own home? As if everything you pour your heart into simply doesn't count? It's a devastating sensation, and the insidious part is how easily you adapt to it, little by little, until one day, something inside you just snaps. Believe me, you won't want to miss what unfolds when a woman finally exhausts her tolerance and decides it's time to start charging for her invisible labor. It all truly began right after his parents, Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett, finally left that Friday. Every other Friday, they made their ritual visit, which for me meant at least 6 hours of meticulous cooking, cleaning, flower arranging, and ensuring every corner of our home was spotless. All this just so Veronica could conduct her customary inspection and deliver one of her passive-aggressive remarks about my little graphic design hobby. She'd purr about how nice it was that I had something to keep me busy, as if my dedication, my actual job, wasn't real work. That evening, the conversation inevitably drifted to how we had managed to acquire such a beautiful house, nestled in the serene suburbs outside New York City. Leonard, his chest inflated with pride, regaled them with tales of his hard work, his vision, his astute investments. He conveniently omitted that the vast majority of our hefty down payment had come directly from my inheritance. The moment the front door clicked shut behind his parents, he spun around, that arrogant smirk I'd always secretly despised playing on his lips. "Sweetheart," he announced, "starting with the next payment, we'll have separate budgets. Your comfortable life at my expense is over." He delivered this with the calm confidence of a man convinced he held all the cards, expecting me to crumble, to beg, or to burst into tears. But all I felt was a chilling clarity, a stark realization. The injustice of his words struck me not as new information, but as a truth that had always been lurking beneath the surface, now finally laid bare. I was the one burning the midnight oil on my tablet, crafting logos, editing videos, and completing freelance projects for clients. I was the one meticulously managing our household accounts, navigating grocery aisles, paying bills, and infusing every room with my taste, and more often than not, my money. Every Sunday, I prepared what amounted to a feast for his parents, appetizers, main course, dessert, only to endure Veronica's pointed criticisms about the sauce or the doneness of the meat. To them, all of it was invisible. It was simply my duty as a wife, something expected, never appreciated. My financial contributions, even if freelance, were dismissed as a whim. My inheritance? Pure luck that didn't count, a detail Leonard conveniently chose to forget. In that singular moment, everything clicked into agonizing focus. He didn't see me as his partner. He saw me as a luxury employee, a woman he was merely supporting. I remember perfectly the first time that gnawing sense of invisibility truly took root. It was during our very first Sunday lunch in this house. I had dedicated 2 full days to preparing a roasted pork, using Grandma Teresa's treasure recipe. I was excited, proud, so eager to please. When Veronica took her first bite, she simply declared, It's a bit dry. Next time, let me supervise you so it turns out better." Leonard said nothing. He just lowered his head, continued eating, and offered his mother a faint, approving smile. That day, I understood every Sunday would be a test, and I was destined to fail. My kitchen, once my creative sanctuary, my refuge, had transformed into a courtroom where I was perpetually the accused, never permitted to defend myself. The very court's countertop I'd chosen and paid for with my own money seemed to mock me, a silent witness to my ignored efforts and my burgeoning resentment. So, when Leonard hurled that phrase at me that Friday, I saw in his eyes he was bracing for a scene. His rigid posture, the clench of his jaw, it all screamed he was ready for a confrontation. He craved my tears, my anger, the same old fight that invariably concluded with him playing the magnanimous, powerful one, setting boundaries. I'm certain he already had his eloquent speech prepared about financial responsibility, about how it was all for our own good. He yearned to reassert himself as the infallible provider and head of the household, a role his parents had relentlessly drilled into him. But that night, the woman he thought he knew, the one who quietly endured criticism, who strove to please everyone, was gone. Something profound shifted within me. It wasn't a calculated decision. It was like a spark igniting deep inside my mind. All the accumulated pain, all the years of quiet humiliation, condensed into a single, razor-sharp idea. The incessant voices in my head, the ones that always tried to justify him, to understand him, to blame myself, went utterly silent. Only an absolute stillness remained, powerful, full of dizzying possibility. I looked into his eyes, and for the first time in a very long while, I didn't see the man I had fallen in love with, but a stranger, merely acting out a role his mother had meticulously written for him. And in that profound silence, I found my answer. To his utter surprise, I smiled. It wasn't forced or sarcastic. It was genuine, calm, almost a profound relief. I looked up and said softly, "Excellent idea, darling. It's about time we had some financial clarity." His reaction was almost comical. He just stared at me, mouth slightly agape, unsure if I was serious or subtly mocking him. He blinked several times, utterly confused, while I maintained my steady, confident tone. There would be no war that night, no tears. Instead, I offered him my most potent weapon, my composure. I picked up my tablet from the coffee table, the very device where I spent countless hours working, and switched it on. The soft glow of the screen illuminated my face. "Let's begin," I suggested. "How about we itemize our shared and individual expenses? That way, everything will be perfectly clear for the next payment cycle. I truly want this to be fair for both of us." His confusion morphed into something akin to fear. He was utterly unprepared for my calmness, my chilling efficiency. He had anticipated drama. I gave him a business meeting. Within seconds, the power dynamic irrevocably shifted, and he didn't even notice. That night, while Leonard slept soundly beside me, I couldn't find rest. My tablet lay on my lap, but I wasn't working for a client. I was working on something far more vital, my escape plan. I meticulously compiled a detailed list of every household task I performed. Meal planning, shopping, cleaning, budgeting, coordinating maintenance, every single invisible job that kept our life humming. Next to each task, I researched the market rate for those same services in New York City. A personal chef, a professional housekeeper, a household manager, an event planner. The numbers aggregated one by one until they formed a staggering total. That's when I knew, with absolute certainty, what I would do. My plan for Sunday lunch began to take shape, a plan both exquisitely beautiful and terrifyingly effective. The clarity Leonard claimed to want was about to arrive, though certainly not in the manner he'd envisioned. On Saturday morning, the house felt strangely different. The air was still, heavy with a quiet tension. There were no clattering pots, no enticing aromas of spices, no frantic rush of me striving for perfection. Leonard descended the stairs, likely expecting to find me in the kitchen, perhaps regretful or consumed by worry. Instead, he found me seated on the patio sofa, a steaming cup of coffee in my hand, my tablet resting on my lap. He stared silently, waiting for me to break. I looked up and offered a serene smile. "Good morning, darling," I said. I slept wonderfully. His face was priceless, utterly bewildered. Peace had become my new weapon, and he had no defense against it. He didn't comprehend that the woman he had humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place sat a strategist who had spent the entire night calculating the precise cost of her freedom. All day, he attempted to provoke me, tossing out snide comments about how nice it must be to enjoy my day off, as if he were oblivious to my weeks overflowing with endless work and sleepless nights. Later, while I was engrossed in one of my designs, he stalked behind me and quipped mockingly, "Good thing you have time for your little drawings." Each word he uttered carved a deeper chasm between us. In the past, such phrases would have stung, making me feel guilty or lazy. But now, each comment was merely another line item in the mental invoice I was meticulously drafting. I listened without reaction, nodding with a calm serenity that visibly infuriated him. And in my mind, I added an extra charge for emotional damage. He didn't realize he was no longer speaking to his wife, but to a service provider on the verge of presenting her bill. His arrogance was the very fuel igniting my new, unyielding determination. That afternoon, I went grocery shopping, but it wasn't the usual weekend expedition. There were no pork ribs for his father, no expensive wine his mother adored, no ingredients for those elaborate family feasts. This time, I navigated the aisles with a completely different purpose. I bought Greek yogurt just for me, a beautiful salmon fillet, avocados, blueberries, and the specialty coffee I truly loved. Every item I placed in the cart was a silent declaration of independence. At the checkout, I paid with my own card and felt a small, yet profoundly powerful satisfaction. It was the first time in a long while that I had purchased food solely for myself, for my taste, my health, my needs. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt like the crucial first step toward reclaiming my space, not just in the house, but within my own life. When I returned and began putting away my groceries, I paused for a moment, gazing at the kitchen. That dream kitchen, with its elegant veined white quartz island and gleaming stainless steel appliances, had been my pride. I had designed it myself, meticulously chosen every detail, from the cabinet handles to the lighting, and crucially, I had paid for it with a significant portion of Grandma Teresa's legacy. I remembered her words the day she handed me the inheritance papers. "It's for you to build your independence, sweetheart, not anyone else's." A pang of guilt formed in my chest as I considered how I had betrayed her trust, how I had allowed my investment to become the stage for my own servitude. But that guilt quickly solidified into a decision as firm as steel. I would honor her memory, and this kitchen would become the birthplace of my independence. As the sun began to dip behind the New York City skyline, a sliver of doubt attempted to creep into my mind. I sat on the porch, wondering if I was being too drastic. Perhaps I should talk to him, try once more to make him understand. But then, like a phantom, the memory of last Christmas resurfaced. I had spent 3 grueling days cooking for 20 of his relatives. I was utterly exhausted, but satisfied until I overheard Veronica whisper to her sister, "Poor Leonard. He works so hard while Marianne just plays house." No one, not even Leonard standing right beside her, defended me. He simply smiled. That memory obliterated any lingering hesitation. No, I wasn't being drastic. I was being fair. For the very first time, I was putting myself first. Saturday's dinner was an odd, almost theatrical scene. I ordered a fresh salad from a nearby restaurant, just for myself. Leonard watched me, expecting me to offer him some, but I didn't. He quietly rose and, with a defeated sigh, made himself a ham and cheese sandwich using the oldest bread he could unearth in the pantry. We ate in a heavy silence, punctuated only by the faint clinking of silverware. He waited for me to speak first, to find the quiet unbearable, to finally break down in tears or a furious outburst. But I savored every bite of my salad with a serenity that was entirely new to me, tasting the sweet flavor of my own self-assertion. He had demanded separate budgets and clear rules, and I was delivering them to him precisely to the letter. What he couldn't comprehend was that his attempt to control me had, in fact, set me free. The cage he had so carefully constructed for me had swung open, and I was learning to fly again, right within the confines of my own home. Sunday morning dawned with an almost eerie peace. I woke early, as always, but instead of rushing to the kitchen to marinate meat or prepare dessert, I brewed myself a cup of tea and ventured out to the patio to read. The city's sunlight began to warm the air, and the house remained in complete silence. There were no clanging pots, no fragrant scent of frying garlic, only the cheerful bird's song and the soft whisper of the breeze. For the first time in many years, a Sunday morning didn't feel like the start of another unpaid workday, but exactly what it was meant to be, a day of rest. I felt a profound peace, the kind that settles deep in your bones when you know you are about to reclaim what is rightfully yours. Leonard eventually came downstairs around 9. His eyes scanned the spotless, empty kitchen, and a distinct line of worry creased his forehead. "Don't tell me you're not cooking. My parents are coming at 1, he exclaimed, his voice almost childish, like a boy fearing his birthday party was about to be canceled. I looked at him over the top of my book and replied as naturally as if we were discussing the weather. "No, sweetheart. Sunday lunches were part of my household management services. And since we now have separate budgets, that service naturally comes with a fee. If you'd like to hire me, we can certainly discuss the rates." His expression morphed from confusion to disbelief, then to barely contained anger. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of gears in his head, desperately trying to devise a way to regain control, but no longer played his game. A few minutes later, his phone rang. Of course, it was Veronica. From the living room, I could hear him speaking in a low, tense voice. "Yes, Mom. Everything's fine. Yes, of course. Something simpler today. A surprise." I detected the forced cheerfulness in his tone, the thinly veiled panic beneath it. The man who incessantly bragged about being in control, the provider, the head of the family, was caught in his own elaborate web. He hung up and glared at me with a fury I had never witnessed before. "Fix this, Mary Ann," he ordered, his voice stripped of its usual arrogance, now tinged with desperation. I simply shook my head. "I'm sorry, Leonard. You set the rules." With a calmness that even surprised me, I picked up my tablet, the very one he always dismissed as my little drawing toy. I opened the spreadsheet app where I had drafted my plan on Friday night and created a new document with a clean, professional design, just like the ones I presented to my most esteemed clients. At the top, I wrote, "Invoice for cooking and household management services." I meticulously began itemizing the costs: menu planning, purchasing quality ingredients, preparation and cooking, 6 hours of labor at the rate of a private chef, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Each line bore a value, based on real market prices in New York City. The total was beautiful, precise, round, and absolutely fair. My work tool had transformed into the instrument of my own justice. When the clock struck 1, I walked to the refrigerator. I retrieved the salmon, avocados, and vegetables I had purchased for myself. With steady, deliberate movements, I began preparing my own lunch. Simultaneously, I grabbed a roll of labels and a marker. I opened the Greek yogurt and inscribed upon a label, "Property of Mary Ann." I did the same with my coffee, my fruit, and my bottle of wine. It was a small, almost absurd gesture, yet one laden with immense meaning. I was drawing a line, not merely within the refrigerator, but within the very fabric of our lives. He had demanded separation, and I was giving it to him in the most literal way possible. I could hear his restless footsteps pacing through the living room, their rhythm marking the inevitable march of time. The doorbell was about to ring, and I was ready. My show was about to commence. At precisely 1 o'clock, the doorbell chimed, a sharp sound slicing through the house's silence like a knife. Each vibration resonated down my spine, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation. It was the signal the precise moment I had meticulously prepared for. I watched Leonard leap from the sofa, as if jolted by an electric current. His face, pale and glistening with sweat, was a roadmap of pure panic. He rushed to the door, fumbling to smooth his shirt, attempting to conjure a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was poised to perform his usual role. The perfect husband, the dutiful son, the confident host, the architect of a happy family illusion, the man of the house. He was utterly oblivious that the very foundations of his carefully constructed castle were teetering on the brink of collapse. From the quiet sanctuary of the patio, my coffee still warm in my hand, I felt like a director watching a play unfold. I was the director, and he, tragically, was the protagonist, entirely unaware that he was about to face his final act. The instant he swung open the door, his transformation was instantaneous. His voice swelled, becoming artificially cheerful, that rehearsed tone I knew all too well. "Mom, Dad, welcome. Come in, please." Veronica and Mr. Charles Bennett entered with the unshakable confidence of people who believed they owned the very ground they walked on. Veronica, resplendent in a flawless white linen suit that likely cost more than my last design invoice, scanned the room. When she didn't immediately spot me, she lifted her chin in disdain. "How strange," she announced loudly. "It doesn't smell like anything today. Usually, you can detect the roast pork from the entrance." Mr. Bennett, as always, remained silent, but his eyes swept the living room, noticing the unusual stillness, the absence of the customary bustling preparations that always heralded their arrival. The first stone had been cast, and I hadn't even moved. Leonard, visibly sweating now, tried desperately to divert his parents. "Today, I wanted to give you a surprise, something different. Why don't you sit in the living room? Can I get you something to drink? A glass of wine? Perhaps whiskey?" His attempt to embody the perfect host was pathetic. He never served the drinks. That had always been my domain. Veronica ignored him completely, depositing her designer purse onto the sofa I had chosen and paid for. Her objective was crystal clear, and she wouldn't be distracted by a mere drink. "First, I'll go to the kitchen to see if Marianne needs help. She's probably overwhelmed by the surprise she's prepared." The word surprise dripped with venomous sarcasm. To her, I was incapable of executing anything correctly without her direct supervision, and she couldn't wait to uncover a mistake, any pretext to reassert her supposed superiority. With the unyielding determination of a general inspecting her troops, she marched towards the kitchen. Leonard tried to intercept her, his hand grasping her arm. "Mom, really, there's no need. I'll take care of it," he pleaded almost. She brushed him off impatiently, as if swatting away a bothersome child. "Don't be ridiculous, Leonard. I know your wife. She probably needs help." And without awaiting a reply, she proceeded down the hallway. From my vantage point on the patio, through the glass door, I had a perfect, unhindered view of the unfolding scene. I saw Leonard's stiff back, his helpless shoulders slumped. I felt no pity for him. Instead, what filled me was a strange, almost pleasant calm. It was poetic justice. He had unleashed this storm with his arrogance, and now he would have to face the hurricane he himself had summoned, his mother. The serenity that enveloped me was so profound, it almost felt supernatural. The peace of knowing that for the first time, the script was entirely within my hands. It was in that fleeting moment of silence before the storm truly broke that I overheard the sentence that sealed my decision. Mr. Bennett, who had lingered near the door, approached his son and asked quietly, "Everything okay, son? You look nervous." Leonard's reply was a venomous whisper, laced with contempt, yet I caught every single word. "It's nothing, Dad. She's just being dramatic again. I had to put her in her place about the money. She'll get over it once she realizes she can't live without my credit card." Every word was another nail hammered into the coffin of our marriage. This wasn't a mere argument or a misunderstanding. This was how he truly saw me. A burden, a parasite, a woman who, in his deluded mind, simply couldn't survive without him. At that precise moment, my plan ceased being a mere lesson. It became a definitive sentence. Veronica stepped into the kitchen. The absolute silence that followed spoke volumes, more eloquently than any words ever could. I could visualize the scene without even moving, her eyes scanning. The immaculate white quartz counters, the dry, shining sink, the cold stove, the closed cabinets. Everything pristine, like a photograph in a magazine, yet utterly devoid of life. She had anticipated the rich scent of spices, the comforting warmth of the oven, the bubbling of pots. Instead, she encountered a sterile quiet, the stark emptiness of a shattered routine. I could almost feel her confusion, her mind racing to construct a logical explanation. Perhaps she imagined the food was in a patio oven, or that everything was prepared and I was simply waiting to serve. But that profound stillness must have gnawed at her reasoning. Then came the scream. It wasn't just a startled shriek. It was a guttural roar of pure fury, a sound that ripped through the air and reverberated off the walls of the house. It was the cry of a queen defied, a matriarch whose tribute had been withheld. I heard the frantic footsteps of Leonard and Mr. Bennet rushing towards the kitchen. They entered to find Veronica standing rigidly in the middle of the tiled floor I had chosen, her face crimson, one trembling finger pointed accusingly at the refrigerator. Her expression was a volatile mixture of rage and disbelief, as if she had uncovered an act of treason rather than an empty kitchen. The show had reached its first breathtaking climax. Leonard's face transformed. Confusion gave way to stark panic, then to a cold, simmering fury as his eyes finally met mine. I stood calmly in the doorway leading to the patio, observing everything with a composure that must have seemed inhuman to him. In my hands, I held my tablet, my work tool, that little drawing toy he used to mock. Its lit screen cast a soft, bluish glow over my face. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough to be sliced. Mr. Bennet's gaze darted from his wife to me, then back to his son, desperately trying to comprehend the unfolding drama. But Veronica required no explanations. To her, the culprit stood directly before her eyes. Her small, dark pupils locked onto mine, burning with a fury that promised outright war. I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was about to face the wrath of a woman who had never once heard the word no. Before Leonard could stammer an excuse, or his father could intervene, Veronica drew a sharp breath and spoke in a tone that sliced through the air like a whip. "Would you care to explain what this means, Mary Ann?" she spat, each word dripping with utter disdain. "Is this supposed to be some kind of joke? It's 1:15. Where's the lunch you were supposed to make?" The emphasis on supposed to screamed her true perception. I wasn't family. I was staff. Her cook, her hostess, her guarantee of comfort. She didn't ask if I was well, if something untoward had occurred. She merely demanded her meal, her routine, her presumed right to be served in my house. She was so utterly convinced of her power over me that it never even crossed her mind that I might have a legitimate reason. Without uttering a single word, I stepped forward. The silence deepened, growing heavier still. I lifted my tablet and slowly turned the screen towards them. The document I had meticulously prepared on Friday night glowed with professional precision. At the top, in an elegant font I had designed myself, the title read, "Invoice, Sunday Lunch Services." I allowed the image to speak for itself. I saw confusion flicker across Mr. Bennet's face. Veronica's rage momentarily dissolved into bewilderment, and pure, unadulterated terror flashed in Leonard's eyes. He, and only he, understood immediately what he was seeing. He had demanded financial clarity, and I was delivering it to him on a gleaming silver platter. With a calmness so profound it seemed to chill the very air, I raised the tablet higher, allowing the bluish light of the screen to wash over their stunned faces. The silence in the kitchen pressed against my ears. Mr. Bennet blinked repeatedly, as if trying to reorient himself to a reality that defied all logic. Veronica, on the other hand, had transitioned from fiery anger to an absolute bewilderment, so complete it seemed to erase every thought from her mind. Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a fish out of water. But it was Leonard's face that remained etched in my memory, like a haunting photograph. His skin was waxy and pale, his features tight and drained of color. His eyes, fixed on the screen, held no anger, no wounded pride, only raw, naked fear. The profound fear of a man watching the meticulously built house of cards of his control collapse with one simple, undeniable breath of truth. Veronica was the first to shatter the silence. She did so with a sharp, hollow laugh. It wasn't genuine or amused, but the nervous reflex of someone desperately trying to regain control of a situation rapidly slipping away. "Oh, please, Marianne. What a silly joke," she scoffed, feigning calm. "Come on now. Stop the theatrics. Turn that thing off and tell us what you prepare for lunch. You must be hiding it somewhere to surprise us." She took a step towards me, wearing that forced smile she deployed whenever she wished to remind everyone who she believed was in charge. She lifted her hand, intending to pat my arm, condescending, almost maternal. But I didn't move. Her hand met only empty air. Her smile vanished instantly. My eyes never left hers. "It's not a joke, Veronica," I said slowly, my voice sounding strangely foreign, as if it didn't belong in that house, as if it were the voice of an executive in a boardroom, not a wife in her own kitchen. I spoke with the precise articulation of someone presenting a crucial report. As Leonard proposed on Friday, we've implemented a complete separation of budgets. And since family event catering was not part of our original agreement, it is now billed separately. The standard rate is $350, and it includes menu planning, the purchase of high-quality ingredients, 6 hours of labor at a private chef's rate in New York City, table service, and post-meal cleanup. Every word was cold, calculated, meticulously stripped of all emotion. I was speaking their language: money, numbers, transactions, the only language they truly respected. That's when Leonard reacted, not with words, but with a violent, desperate movement. He took a long stride towards me, attempting to snatch the tablet from my hands, as if destroying it could somehow erase the reality displayed on its screen. "That's enough, Marianne. Give me that," he growled, his voice low and thick with restrained rage. "What do you think you're doing? You're embarrassing us in front of my parents." His fury was utterly predictable. I had anticipated it. I calmly stepped back, keeping the tablet safely out of his reach. I looked him straight in the eye, without a trace of fear. The woman who used to shrink at his shouting was gone. In her place stood an unshakable stillness, a cool, quiet calm that unsettled him far more than the invoice itself. "Ridiculous," I said softly, yet sharply. "Let me explain what's truly ridiculous, Leonard. Ridiculous was you standing in this very room, telling me my comfortable life at your expense was over. Ridiculous is that you said it while standing on a floor I paid for, in a kitchen where every appliance was bought with my money, inside a house where 80% of the down payment came directly from my grandmother's inheritance." Each word landed like a hammer blow. The impact was immediate. Mr. Bennett took a perceptible step back, looking at his son with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. The carefully constructed story they had maintained for years, that of the model son supporting his artist wife, crumbled to dust around them. Mentioning the inheritance was breaking a sacred taboo. Everyone knew it existed, but no one dared speak of it aloud. Veronica glared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. I was no longer merely the insolent daughter-in-law. I was now a direct threat to her pride and the family's meticulously cultivated reputation. "You ungrateful woman," she hissed. "After everything we've done for you, we gave you a name, a place, a family." She tried to deploy her old, familiar weapons: guilt, shame, the crushing weight of the status she believed she had graciously bestowed upon me. But those bullets harmlessly ricocheted off the newly forged armor of truth and self-respect. Without a single word, I turned around slowly, deliberately, almost theatrically. I walked to the refrigerator, the one now filled with my neatly labeled items, opened the door, and the interior light illuminated a small army of tags bearing my name. It was a powerful image, the tangible symbol of my fiercely reclaimed independence. I extracted a bottle of sparkling water, one of the expensive brands Leonard used to deride as a useless luxury. When I opened it, the soft hiss of carbonation sounded loud and defiantly clear in the suddenly silent kitchen. I took a long, slow sip, my eyes fixed unwaveringly on them. I didn't speak. I didn't have to. The message was as crystal clear as the water I was drinking. This is my space. These are my things, and I decide what happens here. My silence was my unequivocal declaration of war. The profound calm on my face seemed to fracture something deep inside him. His expression twisted into a volatile mixture of fury and raw humiliation. He had lost control of the scene, of his audience, and most devastatingly, of me. Desperate to reclaim it, he resorted to his final, most desperate weapon, a threat. "This ends now, Marianne," he said, his voice trembling, barely holding steady. "You're going to turn off that damn tablet, apologize to my parents for this circus, and start cooking something, or I swear you'll pack your things and get out of my house right now." The words echoed hollowly, a pathetic final attempt to assert an authority he no longer possessed. I turned slowly to face him, still holding the cold bottle in my hand, a physical manifestation of my cold, unyielding resolve. A small, steady smile, not mocking, simply sure, appeared on my lips. I looked straight into his eyes, those eyes I had once loved, but that now reflected only the fear of a stranger, and allowed the silence to stretch before I shattered his threat with surgical calm. "Allow me to correct you, Leonard," I said in a low, precise voice. "It's not your house. It's mostly mine. My inheritance money is legally recorded in the purchase." I dropped that truth into the kitchen like a bomb. The silence that followed was explosive. I saw a realization dawn, stark and painful, on Veronica's and Mr. Bennett's faces. They finally understood. They weren't looking at a rebellious wife. They were standing in front of the rightful owner of the house they were in. Leonard was speechless. His threat collapsed at his feet. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had flipped completely. I finished my water in one steady sip and added, just as calmly, "The offer still stands. For $100 for the lunch service, or if you prefer, we can begin negotiating a rental agreement. I can draft it right now." I paused, then added with a restrained irony, "That, of course, is also a billable service." My words hung in the air before settling, heavy and unyielding. The shock seemed to absorb all the oxygen from the room. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was dense, charged with the brutal reality we were all facing. Veronica stared at me, her eyes wide, her face shifting from disbelief to a rage so profound it seemed unable to escape her throat. Mr. Bennett stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, no longer disapproving, but calculating, as if reassessing a failed investment. In Leonard was pale, almost translucent, as though my revelation hadn't merely shattered his argument, but had drained the very life from him. He stood there, in the middle of my kitchen, like a ghost, lost in the wreckage of his own disaster. Veronica was the first to explode, as expected, though her anger no longer carried the force it once had. It sounded like a storm that had lost its terrifying center. "You manipulative liar," she spat, though her voice lacked its usual commanding authority. "How dare you talk to us about money, about contracts? This is my son's house," she added, looking around as if that alone could reassert her power. "You've poisoned his mind," she went on, clinging desperately to her old script, the one where she was the queen and I was the ungrateful servant. But now her words rang hollow, desperate, like blanks fired against a wall of concrete. The power she had wielded for years, built on guilt, duty, and shame, had utterly evaporated the moment I confronted her fantasies with the hard, undeniable facts of financial reality. I ignored her. She was no longer my focus. I turned my gaze to her husband, the quiet foundation of all their authority. I looked him straight in the eyes, a deep calm rising from within me. "Mr. Bennett," I said evenly, "you're a businessman. You understand assets, liabilities, returns, investments. My grandmother left me an inheritance, and with that money, I paid for 80% of the down payment on this property. Leonard contributed the remaining 20%, and his salary covers part of the mortgage. While my income as a designer pays for maintenance and all household expenses, I paused, maintaining my professional tone. Tell me, as a man of numbers, do you truly think it's fair that the majority shareholder of this asset be treated as an unpaid employee? I was speaking his language, the language of tangible value, of numbers that left no room for emotional debate. Mr. Bennett didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted from me to his son, and for an instant, I saw a flicker of profound disappointment cross his face. Then he turned towards his wife, whose expression was tight, distorted by sheer frustration. Finally, he looked back at me. His eyes no longer held disdain, but something new, a cool assessment, almost a quiet respect. He didn't utter a word, but his silence was the clearest response I could have asked for. In a court of logic and facts, the case was closed. It wasn't a victory for me. It was a damning sentence for Leonard. His father, with that eloquent silence, had just confirmed everything I'd said, and it utterly destroyed him. I watched him deflate like the air escaping a balloon. The arrogance, the fury, the pride, all of it vanished, leaving behind only a hollow sadness. He ran a hand through his hair, carefully avoiding my gaze and that of his parents. "That's enough, Mary Ann," he whispered, his voice trembling, barely audible. "You won. That's what you wanted, isn't it? You won. You ruined Sunday. You ruined everything." It wasn't an apology. It was the whine of a child blaming someone else for breaking a toy he had already smashed himself. He blamed me for revealing the truth, not realizing that he was the one who had meticulously constructed the lie. 2. Leonard, my act of independence was an act of wanton destruction. I slowly shook my head, and a shadow of genuine sadness passed through me. "I didn't ruin anything, Leonard," I said quietly. "I just held up a mirror. What you saw in it was already broken long ago. The only difference is that today, I decided to stop pretending I didn't see the cracks." I walked calmly to the kitchen island and set my tablet down on the quartz counter, the very spot where my plan had first begun to solidify. My work tool, the one he used to belittle as my little drawing toy, now rested motionless, its purpose profoundly fulfilled. The invoice still glowed on its screen, like a digital epitaph for our marriage, exactly as it had been until that very day. I took my phone from my pocket, and since we're all so intent on treating everything as business, I said, looking directly at Veronica, "Allow me one last professional gesture." I dialed a number I knew by heart. A voice answered immediately. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" "Good afternoon," I replied in a polite, almost cheerful tone. "I'd like to confirm a reservation for 3 people under the name Veronica Bennett." "Yes, that's right. For lunch. Could it be on the terrace?" "Perfect. Thank you very much." I hung up and looked at them. Their faces were a portrait of utter confusion. "I've reserved a table for you at one of the most exclusive restaurants on the Upper East Side," I said evenly. "It's a gift from me. Consider it compensation for the inconvenience and for the catering service not provided today." It wasn't a gesture of peace. It was a gesture of undeniable power, an elegant, decisive dismissal. I was offering them luxury, the same luxury they had always used to underline their superiority. But this time, it came from me, not as a plea, but as a definitive statement of hierarchy. The silence that followed was so deep, I could hear the faint, steady hum of the refrigerator. Veronica opened her mouth, but no sound escaped. Mr. Bennett watched me with a complicated expression, part surprise, part faint amusement, as if recognizing a masterstroke. Leonard, on the other hand, sank further into his palpable defeat. I hadn't beaten him with shouting or tears, but with precision, with a calculated courtesy that left him utterly disarmed, with no conceivable way out. He had lost on his own battlefield, power and status. "We're not going anywhere," Veronica stammered finally, her eyes darting to her husband for backup. "Charles, for heaven's sake, say something. Do something." But for the first time in all the years I'd known them, Mr. Bennett didn't side with her. He shook his head slowly, with a finality that left no room for doubt. "Let's go, Veronica," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I think Marianne has made herself perfectly clear." It was the final, devastating blow. The patriarch, the silent judge, had just delivered his verdict, and it wasn't in favor of his own blood. He had chosen reason over loyalty, truth over pretense. Veronica's face crumbled. In a matter of seconds, she seemed to age 10 years. She had been betrayed by her son, who hadn't defended the family's honor, and abandoned by her husband, who refused to fight a lost war. With clumsy movements, she grabbed her designer purse, that ridiculous symbol of a status that no longer held sway, and without even a glance at me, walked past me toward the front door. Mr. Bennett followed her, but paused in the doorway. He looked at me for a long moment and gave a small nod. It wasn't an apology or an approval. It was an acknowledgement between equals. Then he left, closing the door with a soft, final click. The echo of that sound lingered in the air, marking the end of one act and the uncertain beginning of another. Only Leonard and I remained in the silent house. He hadn't moved. He stood there in the middle of the kitchen, shoulders slumped, staring at the empty space his parents had just occupied. After a while, he finally lifted his head. His eyes no longer held anger, only confusion, a profound sense of loss, and the dawning, bitter understanding of what had just transpired. The war with his parents had ended in total surrender, but the one between us had only just begun, and for the first time, in the quiet solitude of my kitchen, I felt undeniably ready for it. Leonard still stood there, motionless, turned to stone, frozen in place, a statue amidst the ruins of his own kingdom. The silence his parents left behind was heavier than any scream. I watched him for a few seconds, waiting for a reaction, a word, anything to break the stillness, but nothing came. He finally sank onto one of the stools of the island, the very one where he had delivered his cruel ultimatum 2 nights earlier, and buried his face in his hands. There was no anger left in his posture, only the crushing weight of total defeat. And in that instant, I felt no triumph, no satisfaction. What filled me instead was a deep, aching emptiness. The recognition that the man I had once loved no longer existed, if he ever truly had. Before me wasn't a husband, but a stranger sitting in my kitchen, mourning not the loss of his partner, but the loss of his audience. That night, we didn't speak a single word. I took my pillow and a blanket and settled in the guest room, the same one I used as my office. Closing that door felt more final than any argument. It was the physical wall that perfectly symbolized the emotional barrier he had meticulously built for years. The next morning, when I came downstairs, he was already gone for work. On the quartz countertop lay a note in his rushed handwriting. "We need to talk." I didn't read the rest. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash. We had talked enough. Now it was time to act. I spent the day contacting attorney Julia Harper, a lawyer specializing in real estate and divorce cases, recommended by one of my clients. The conversation was clear, direct, and surprisingly liberating. For the first time, I was planning for my future, not ours. A week later, I met Leonard, not at the house, but in the neutral setting of a coffee shop. I handed him a folder. It contained a copy of the property deed, bank statements meticulously detailing the transfer of my inheritance money for the down payment, and a comprehensive proposal for asset division. Everything was organized into clean, precise spreadsheets, as meticulous as the invoice I had once shown his mother. I watched as he read. His face turned an ashen pale. In those cold, black and white numbers, the fiction that he had been the sole provider completely collapsed. Every figure was a mirror, reflecting a truth he could no longer deny. "Marianne, please," he whispered, looking up. "We can fix this. I promise I'll change. I'll set boundaries with my mother. I'll do anything." His promises sounded hollow, echoes from a past that no longer had a place in my life. The relationship with his parents disintegrated in the most predictable way. Veronica tried calling me a dozen times the next day, alternating between furious voicemails and falsely conciliatory messages. I didn't answer any of them. I blocked her number and Mr. Bennett's too. A few days later, I received an email from him. It was brief and formal. We regret what happened on Sunday. Leonard has explained the financial side. We hope you can resolve your matters in the best way possible. It wasn't an apology. It was a strategic withdrawal. They knew they had lost their access, their influence, their privileges. They were cutting their losses. I never heard from them again, and their absence felt like opening a window after years of breathing stale air. The fate of the house, that supposed nest of love that had become my gilded cage, was resolved with the same cold efficiency as everything else. On my lawyer's advice, I gave Leonard two options. He could buy out my share of the property, which would mean securing a mortgage for nearly 80% of its current market value, or we could sell and split the profit according to our documented contributions. Of course, he couldn't afford the first option. His salary, though decent, simply wasn't enough to sustain the illusion of luxury he loved to project without my capital. Reluctantly, he agreed to sell. Watching him sign the papers in front of Mr. Robert Thompson, the realtor, was the true, quiet end of our marriage. There were no tears, no shouting, only the precise sound of a pen signing the close of a very long story. 2 weeks later, while I was in a client meeting, he moved out. When I returned, half the closets were empty. His personal things were gone. On the countertop, he left his keys and a note. "I'm sorry. I never knew what he was sorry for. Humiliating me, destroying our marriage, or simply for being caught." Through a mutual friend, I later heard he'd moved into a small apartment near his office. Functional, charmless, cramped. His comfortable life was indeed over, but not at my expense. It had collapsed under its own hollow weight. He wanted separate budgets, and ended up with a separate life. The house sold quickly in New York City's competitive market. On closing day, I received a transfer large enough to guarantee not just security, but true freedom. With part of that money, I rented a beautiful loft in Soho, brick walls, expansive windows, and warm light flooding my new space. Marion Carter Design Studio. The rest I invested, carefully following Grandma Teresa's advice. Build your independence, not someone else's. My business began to truly thrive. Without Sunday lunches, without the constant, draining pressure to seek approval that never materialized, my creativity took magnificent flight. I landed major clients, ambitious projects. What had once been my hobby became a solid, flourishing company. Now, when I sit in my studio with my tablet on my lap, I sometimes think about that white quartz kitchen, not with bitterness, but with a quiet, profound gratitude. It was the stage of my greatest humiliation, yes, but it was also the crucible of my liberation. These days, I cook only for pleasure. I invite friends who genuinely enjoy my food and fill my home with laughter instead of hollow criticism. Leonard, Veronica, and Mr. Bennett are simply characters in a distant story, shadows of another, bygone life. I wish them no harm. I simply wish them nothing at all. They occupy zero space in my vibrant present. The life I have now, I designed it myself, with my own rules, my own colors, my own rhythm. Friday nights are no longer something I dread, but something I celebrate. Sometimes I order my favorite food. Other times I open a bottle of wine and work late on a project I'm passionate about, simply because I want to. I look around at this space that is entirely mine, built with my work and effort, and I finally understand what true wealth means. It's not in a huge house or a three-course dinner. It's in a quiet peace of living by your own authentic rules. My name no longer appears on makeshift labels inside a refrigerator. It's engraved on my studio door, on my invoices, on my project contracts, and most importantly, on the contract of my own happiness. That's a value no one can ever measure or, crucially, take away. If I learned anything from this whirlwind, it's that your worth is not an opinion others get to debate. It's not measured by a husband's approval, a mother-in-law's praise, or anyone else's validation. It is a fact. For years, I allowed their distorted perception of me to define my own. I let their blindness make me disappear. Their criticism convinced me I wasn't enough. I used to believe that if I just tried harder, cooked better, kept the house spotless, they would finally see my worth. But the problem was never my effort. The problem was their ingrained inability to recognize it. The greatest lesson wasn't about teaching them my value. It was about reminding myself of it. The irony is that Leonard was right about one thing. It was time to end the comfortable life at someone else's expense. He just picked the wrong person. The comfortable life was his, built on my inheritance, sustained by my invisible labor, and decorated with my emotional energy. He and his parents had been enjoying the benefits of a partnership where only one partner paid the full, exorbitant price. My story isn't unique. Millions of women around the world are silent partners in their own lives, contributing invisible capital, time, energy, love, meticulous organization, assets that never appear on any balance sheet. Yet without them, everything would inevitably collapse. That invoice I showed on my tablet was never truly about $350. It was a statement of principles, a boundary I should have drawn long before. Putting a price on my work was never about getting rich. It was my way of making it absolutely clear that what I do isn't free. Sometimes the only way to make people truly understand the value of what you do is to show them the undeniable cost of not having it. Boundaries aren't walls to keep others out. They're essential lines we draw to protect ourselves, to teach the world decisively how we deserve to be treated. And the hardest, most vital lesson is this. You are the one who must hold that pencil. No one else would draw the line for you. True strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it reveals itself in the quiet, unshakable certainty of a firm decision. My power didn't come from conflict. It was born in the profound calm of that Friday night, when his humiliation met not my tears, but my resolute smile. We live in a society that too often teaches women to defend themselves through emotion, to cry, to beg, to over-explain. But there is immense, untapped power in logic, in serenity, in using the very tools of the system that tries to hold you down to set yourself free. My tablet, that little drawing toy he once mocked, became my sword. My meticulous knowledge of home management and finances became my impenetrable shield. I didn't need to raise my voice. I simply presented the undeniable facts. And facts, unlike opinions, are not up for debate. And if you, listening to my story, have ever felt invisible, underestimated, or taken for granted, I want you to know something. Your work, your effort, your time, they matter. Even if no one else is keeping diligent count. Don't wait for humiliation to begin valuing what you do. Start today. Make a mental list of everything you contribute, every task, every detail you keep running without recognition. Be your own accountant. Acknowledge your invisible capital, because the first step toward earning others' respect is respecting yourself, with a conviction that doesn't break for anyone. Your peace, your dignity, and your invaluable energy are priceless, and you don't need anyone's permission to boldly claim them. My story found its ending, one that I wrote, produced, and financed myself. But I know there are thousands like mine still being written, stories unfolding every day in kitchens, offices, and living rooms across the world. Mine ended with the sale of a house. But in truth, it began with the purchase of my freedom. And that, my friends, is an investment that never loses its value. Today, my life isn't perfect, but it is entirely mine. And that ownership, the ownership of my independence, is the only one that truly matters. Have you ever had to put a price on your peace just to make someone understand its worth? If my story about how I turned a kitchen into a boardroom and an invoice into a declaration of independence resonated with you, leave me a comment and tell me your experience. And if, like me, you believe that every woman deserves for her value to be recognized and never discounted, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Together, we can make sure that more stories of women who stopped serving dinner and started serving justice are finally heard. Thanks for watching. Take care. Good luck.